Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and given the plethora of media platforms today, television, the online world, social media, YouTube featuring channels and programs on virtually every subject imaginable, there are many, many, many people doing programs and podcasts that reach large audiences and become very popular. And not only among young people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but many older people now listen to podcasts every day, including political podcasts that are simply talk shows online. Shows that lean left, such as Ezra Klein's podcast, and shows that lean right, such as Ben Shapiro's daily podcast. And people like Ezra Klein and Ben Shapiro have a significant influence on American culture and American thinking today. And another leading figure in the world of political podcasts is a man named Dave Rubin, who hosts one of the top shows on YouTube and one of the top podcasts on iTunes. Dave Rubin's a Jewish kid from Long Island who's had a fascinating personal journey, which we'll talk about with him in just a moment. And Dave Rubin has also written a book which has exploded in popularity. A well-written book, an easy read. It's called Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in the Age of Unreason, which, as we do this edition of L'Chaim in May of 2020, is now 11th on the New York Times bestsellers list and is 14th on Amazon's list of most sold books. Don't Burn This Book is a sort of a self-help book in which Dave Rubin writes that if you read his book, he hopes to awaken you and change your life and give you a better and happier life by the way you view the world, get you off of the addiction of social media and your cell phone, which he points out often consumes attention more than the live human being sitting across from us. And he hopes the book will help readers interact with other people better. And where is Dave Rubin on the political spectrum? And who's likely to enjoy reading Don't Burn This Book? Those are not so easy questions to answer, though most probably, if you believe that people who don't see the world as you do are somehow immoral and are not worth listening to or dialoguing with openly on issues such as abortion, gay marriage, immigration, the environment, globalism, Israel, Fox News, Donald Trump. If things have become for you black or white, holy or cursed, pure good or all evil, Dave Rubin and his book, Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in the Age of Unreason, may not be for you. But if you'd like to hear the thoughts of someone who's been on a philosophical journey himself and has much to say about what that journey has taught him and who he is as a major voice in the general culture today, then I'm most happy to introduce to you Dave Rubin. Dave, you've written a wonderful book. Thank you so much for joining us on JBS. And again, mazel tov for all the success you've had with Don't Burn This Book.
Mark, I'm thrilled to be here with you. And I have to say, I'm in the midst of this crazy book tour right now, and I'm talking to people quite literally about 12 hours a day nonstop for about, now it's been a good 7 or so days that I've been doing it. That was one of the most thoughtful, lovely intros I have heard the entire time. This might be it. I might be wrapping it up after this conversation. I'm sending this one to my mom for sure.
I want your mom to see this.
She will. She will.
All right. And my wife's watching also right now.
Excellent.
So before we talk about the ideas in the book, I want to know a little bit about you personally. And I've read here and there, but I want to hear it from you. Yeah, who in the world are you? Begin with your own Jewish background. Where were you raised, and who were your parents, and what kind of world did you grow up in, Dave?
Sure. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in 1976. When I say grew up, I mean my first 3 years were in Brooklyn, but the old Brooklyn, that when Jews of a certain age think of Brooklyn, we don't think of Brooklyn of today, the hipster Brooklyn and the expensive barbecue Brooklyn. We think of the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Brooklyn of, oh, there are Jews on this street and Irish people and Greeks and Italians and Hispanics. And really that ethnic mix of people who came from all over the world, all of them with nothing. I mean, everybody's story is the same. It's the food and the language that's different, but really the ethnic background and that richness, that's the beauty of America. And I think that's why, in many ways, Jews have thrived so much in America, because we've just been part of the stew that allows Americans to thrive in whatever they want to do. So my dad grew up in Brooklyn before me. My mom grew up in New York City, actually, and then in Westchester. They actually met in Israel after college. They both went on one of the tours that you're going to go and teach Israelis some English. And they met in Israel around 1970 or so. And then when I grew up in Long Island, Nassau County, Syosset, Long Island, we were a conservative family. We did Shabbats, still do Shabbats when we can. We did some virtual Shabbats in the midst of this coronavirus, and we did the Zoom Seder like everybody else.
Yes.
But being Jewish was very much part of our lives. I mean, it was my dad was always involved in all sorts of things at the temple, and it was part of it. And for Jews, it's an interesting blend. I always find this sort of the push and pull between, tradition and religion, where in many ways, a lot of Jews, I think in an American sense, see more of like the Seinfeldization is what I call it of Judaism, which is basically, there's a certain sense of humor. There's a certain rhythm to the way we talk. There's a cultural appreciation and all the foods and all that sort of stuff. And that's different than what I would say is a religious attachment in many ways that I think Christians have, sort of like this personal relationship with God, where Jews in many ways, it's really like this endless struggle with God, I think, something like that. And I've had the ups and downs of that. But so then to just sort of cap the early stage of my life, we had a very decent childhood. My parents still live in the house that we grew up in. They've been there for 40 years.
What are their names?
My mom is Carol, and my dad is Ira, although he goes by Yitz. And
Yitz.
I know on this show he will want me to refer to him as Yitz.
Very good. And do you have siblings?
And I have 2 siblings, a younger brother and a younger sister. And my brother has 3 kids. My sister has 2 kids. My sister actually, because of coronavirus, left New York City, and she's been living in my parents' house. So my brother-in-law, who's Israeli, actually, he's a startup guy, of course, and he's been using my childhood bedroom as his office. So you can get people out of Long Island, but it always somehow brings them back.
You mention in your book you went to Hebrew school.
Yeah.
First of all, did you love it?
Did I love it?
You better say no.
Yeah. I mean, did I love it? I didn't love it. I didn't love it. I don't think I really mind it. Some kids sort of hate it, or they're creating all sorts of problems or stuff like that. I didn't love it or hate it. It was just sort of another thing of growing up.
All right.
But by the way, that's how I felt about public school too. I didn't love it or hate it, but I knew I was supposed to go to school.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And did you have a bar mitzvah ceremony?
I had a bar mitzvah.
What was that like?
it was a very standard sort of Long Island bar mitzvah. You know, you do the service. My Haftorah was one of the longest ones. My birthday's June 26th. I know it was one of the longest ones of the year, so that was the running joke with the cantor when I was doing the practicing and all that. But you know, we had the standard sort of, you know, 1980s. It was 1989. The 1980s party that everybody's going to have in Long Island, that, you know, you now see books written about, coffee table books about bar mitzvahs from the 80s.
And remind me, where did you go to college?
I went to SUNY Binghamton, State University of New York at Binghamton.
When you're in college, does Judaism mean anything to you?
You know, I guess at first I probably did a little bit of the Chabad stuff for some of the holidays, something like that. My friends, I mean, my friend group was actually pretty diverse in general. My two best friends growing up actually are still my two best friends to this day. One of them is Italian and one of them is Greek. And one of the things that I think made our friendship so rich is that our families were actually very similar. And when I said to you before about how, you know, the foods are different, but, you know, the love of family that I think you really see in Italian families, that you really see in Greek families, and of course you really see in Jewish families, the love of tradition, of foods, all of these things. I think that brought something very special to the table. So they would come to my house for Shabbat dinner or to light the Hanukkah candles. I would go to my friend Ari's house for Greek Easter, and we'd go to John's house for Christmas. And nobody was trying to convert anybody, nothing like that. We always had a running joke when Ari would come over for Shabbat, and my mom would always feel guilty. Could he have a tiny bit of wine? He's only 13, 14 years old. And you know, it was this nonstop joke that if he had a tiny bit of wine and then he got on his bike and, you know, rode those 2 blocks, if he got hit while he's drunk, for, you know, what was going to happen. But fortunately, everyone survived.
Very, very, very good. All right, I want to come to your book now. It is a courageous book. It's a very honest book, and is well written. It has a lot of the humor that is you, and people should know you worked in comedy for a long time before you ultimately became, in essence, a talk show host. But you have a chapter in your book. It's a sub-chapter, Dave. It's in the section on everybody should have a mentor, which is a very Jewish notion. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in your chapter on having a mentor, you have a sub-chapter on religion, where you almost admit, you say that human beings, that we need religious stories. And at one point, you actually write that you were either agnostic or you were atheist, and you say in your book that you now believe in something beyond you. A fascinating thing for me to read. I just want to talk about how you feel now about whatever that means to you. When you say you found out, and by the way, there's a man named Jordan Peterson, who is a philosopher, and he teaches in Toronto, and he had an enormous impact on you. We may get to that a little bit later. But you talk about what you learned from him. And what you talk about is how you learned from him, in part, that there is something beyond, and it means something to you. And again, people who read the book, you have this marvelous, marvelous chapter on how you actually climbed Mount Sinai with great stomach distress. I'll let people to read it. But in that section, you ultimately come to this idea where you try to explain to us that believing in something beyond you is something which at one point you would never have said, and you say it now. Talk to me about that.
Well, there's a lot there, obviously. We could probably do a whole hour just on that. And I would preface all this by sort of referencing what I said earlier, which is that from what I've always understood, the Jewish belief in God is a little bit different than, say, a Christian belief in God, where they have a belief that they want you to have this personal relationship. Where I remember growing up, and you know, every holiday we're talking about God, and obviously all of these things, and you know, I can do the Maxwell House Haggadah backwards probably at this point in my life. So God is very much in. It's within the I'll give you a good word. It's in the gestalt of all of the Jewish stuff that we're all part of. And yet you find often you'll meet Jews who will say, well, you say, are you Jewish? They'll say, I'm Jewish. Are you a believer? No, I'm an atheist or I'm agnostic or something like that. And those things don't seem to be completely at odds in a way that you very rarely will meet someone that says, I'm a Christian or I'm a Catholic, but I'm a non-believer. For them, there's a difference where they sort of say, if I'm a non-believer, I'm actually stepping away from everything else. I think there's many reasons for that. Obviously, there's a cultural identity attached to Judaism that even if you said I'm a complete non-believer, well, the ethnic attachment is still what you are, whether you like it or not. So when I was on tour with Jordan Peterson, who was also a clinical psychologist in Toronto and he wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, which really became sort of the hottest self-help more than anything else, but it's beyond self-help because it's not just about helping yourself. It really is about helping the world. And I was on tour with him for about a year and a half, and we did about 120 shows. We were in about 20 countries. And I saw this man by his words, by telling people some simple things: stand up straight with your shoulders back, clean your room, do things in your life to set your life in order so you can set the world in order. I saw him actually do it. I saw people get off drugs. I saw them reconnect with family members that they had fights with. I saw people, better their relationships with their spouses, all of these things. And then one of the other things that was a common thread that he talked about throughout the year and a half was the importance of religious stories. That what I've come to believe is that at a micro level, meaning at the individual level, of course, an atheist or an agnostic or someone that just comes from no religious upbringing whatsoever can be a moral person. I absolutely believe that. You've seen my show. I've sat down with some of the greatest atheist thinkers that we have, from Sam Harris and Michael Shermer and Peter Boghossian. I think these are wonderful, wonderful people who I have no doubt live good moral lives and do the best they can to put good into the world. What I've come to believe, though, is that we need truth outside of ourselves to organize as a society. And that's why I believe that biblical stories are so timeless. That's why these things have existed for, in our case as the Jews, for 5,700 some odd years, that there are eternal truths that aren't bendable by the whims of the day or the politics of the day, that there are things that we know inherently are true that biblical stories are telling us. Why do we believe that the little guy can beat the big guy? It's because David beat Goliath. That's an incredible, profound truth that if you were just growing up and at a purely secular level, your parents said to you, well, you're the little guy, you can beat the big guy, go do it, get to it. You say, well, I can't beat the big guy. How can I beat the big guy? I can't do it. But there are these truths that have been handed down to us generation after generation after generation. And by the way, that is a key part of this. There is something, whether my father is a perfect believer or a struggling believer or whatever else, there is a core to what he believes that is attached to the core that his father believed, that his father believed, that his father believed, that let us be here. In many ways, Jews shouldn't even be here. With the history that our people have had, with the pogroms and the Holocaust and the amount of true oppression, it doesn't make sense that this thing stuck around, but it stuck around for a reason. And I think ultimately you can't decouple that reason from belief. And that has led me to believe that for a society to stay strong in fierce winds, whether those winds are tyrannical or they're political or they're social and unearthing, that the only way you can do it is to organize around some sort of religious story, some sort of eternal story outside of yourself. The last thing I would say on this is that I view this as it's the best way to put it, sort of a methodical reason to believe, as opposed to a spiritual reason to believe, if that makes sense. Certain people need the spiritual reason to believe in God, and I think that's just fine, actually. I believe in that you need it for a more tangible reason, a more granular reason. And I think it's an interesting place to have a discussion.
All right. I love the way you say it. By the way, I don't know if people who are familiar with your podcast or watch you when you do a guest shot on TV, whether they would have imagined Dave Rubin saying what you just said. You have a profound understanding of how traditions, religious traditions, the Jewish tradition, and society works. And it was one of the things that made me love your book. But I want
Thanks.
to push you a little bit more.
Push.
When you write about Jordan, you say that he simply wants people to take their moral codes from an objective reality outside of themselves. And then you write, the ideas of reason, individual liberty, and a representative government have to come from somewhere beyond just the human mind. For if they come from us, you write, then they can be taken away from us. They must be built upon a foundation unalterable by the whims of man. Now, Dave, that's slightly different in my mind from saying you believe there is something outside of yourself which gave the law, whatever gave the law is.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I understand that's a metaphor, but gave the law meaning that there is something outside of human beings that in some way is presenting us with an understanding that there is something beyond ourselves that is immutable. Saying that we should cling to the religious myth and the religious, what Elie Wiesel called the tale, is very understood. In a Jewish tradition, it's all about midrash, and you get it. But that's different than you're saying. I once was an agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I once was an atheist. And now I see myself differently. So I'm not asking you, do you believe it's important for us to appreciate the insight of the story of David and Goliath? I'm asking Dave Rubin, where are you now in terms of your own personal journey, in terms of your embrace, not belief, your embrace that there is a divine in this universe, a God in this universe who wants something from Dave Rubin?
I like the fact that you're pushing me, and my answer to that would be I consider myself as of now, my life now and everything that I've talked about that got me here, I'm a believer because I see no way around belief. It's as simple as that. I see no way that the universe could be ordered outside of belief. And by the way, because as you know, I'm more of a political creature than certainly than a religious creature publicly, something like that. One of the beautiful things that the founders of the United States did was they talked about God-given rights, that these rights came from outside of us, sort of as I laid out in the book. And then they did something even more brilliant than that. At the same time as they're saying, we didn't give you these rights came from before us, we're also going to tell you that we're going to separate church and state, even though we believe God gave you the rights in the first place. And I think that's the type of secularism that actually can stand the whims of the day. It's why America has thrived and given more freedoms to more people than any other country in the history of the world. Because had they said, oh, we created a government and that's the thing that will free you, well, guess what? For all of their good intentions, they ain't going to be around forever, and they weren't around forever. And as you know, we live in strange political times where it feels that the future is very upset and that the future could go in any which direction. And I don't want to leave my future to the whims of man. There are truths. The United States did not make me free. It can take my freedom, but I was born free.
Are you surprised when you hear yourself, if I had known you 5 years ago, would you have spoken the same way?
I'm very surprised, actually. And this is not something that I talk about that often, which is why this is an interesting conversation for me. Most people want to know what I think about every little political machination of the day. I'm happy to talk about this. And I think you can probably hear it in my voice that I am working these things through. I'm trying to speak about them carefully so that what I say is actually the truth as we're going through it. And by the way, I would also add something that I found sort of interesting. You know, as I've traveled and I've talked to people of every walk of life, of color, gender, sexuality, all of those things, I've sensed a real rebirth in Christian America in belief that there has been something that, as we sense this weird time where progressivism is always about big government and identity politics, which, by the way, identity politics always put Jews at the bottom because we're considered white, in that we've succeeded. And that is one of the many dangers of identity politics. That's sort of a separate issue. One of the things that I'm starting to think is that I do think that Jews are going to have a rebirth of belief. I think secularism in America has been incredible for Jews who have succeeded and thrived and been accepted and coalesced into the American fabric like nowhere else, you know, and in some ways in a more functional way than even in Israel, in a bizarre sense. We've done it right in America, but in a certain way, it also came at the expense of belief, that we just sort of believed in liberalism. You know, like my dad would always say, well, the second religion was being part of the Democratic Party. And that's a very far party from the Democratic Party of 2020 that embraces people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. This is a very different party. So I do sense that a lot of Jews are feeling something like, well, we've taken secularism as far as it can go, and maybe now we do need something. So maybe I'm just one of the people that's voicing that for the first time as a public person, something like that. I
hope you're right. It's just fascinating to hear you. We're going to get to politics, but not yet.
Okay.
One of the things that you write about, you're very open about, you are gay. You're married to another, I think his name is David. Also.
His name is David. It's very confusing for people, but I go by Dave. So that
David
usually, my parents call me David though. So when we're with my parents, it's a little confusing.
Okay. And by the way, a theme of your book is the closet. And you use it in a number of ways. And you talk about how very busy, that's the word you use, how busy the closet is. And you also talked about what a relief it was for you to come out of the closet. One of the things I was wondering was the extent to which, you know, here you are, a kid from a conservative mainstream Jewish family on Long Island. What was your parents' reaction when you decided that you wanted them to understand also that you're gay?
Well, you know, I came out very late. I mentioned this in the book. I didn't really even come out to the first friend until I was 25. That, especially by today's standards, that's very late. I mean, you know, kids.
And by the way, when did you know you were gay?
I mean, in retrospect, I probably knew around 12, 13, 14, you know, all of those years knew it, but I just kind of hid it away and just didn't think about it. And because of that, I lived a very, you know, normal childhood in that regard. I played video games with my friends. We played sports. I did all of the normal things. And yet I had this other piece of me that I just sort of hid away. And the thing is, I mean, when I talk about the political closet in the book, you can be closeted about anything. Anything that you are not sharing of yourself with your friends, with your loved ones, with your family, you can be closeted about. And as I talk about in the book, you know, when you're closeted, the dangerous part of that really is that there's only room for one in the closet. And human beings, we need other people to map truth. You need to be able to say what you think and have someone say what they think back to you so that you can actually realize there's a world outside of your brain, outside of your thoughts. And when you're in the closet and you live half your life or whatever it is, not really being yourself, it can actually distort your whole reality. So to directly answer your question, when I came out to my parents, I was already into my mid to almost late 20s at that point. And, you know, I can't say that they were totally shocked because I wasn't bringing a lot of girls around. So, but I was also doing stand-up, so that was sort of a convenient excuse because I was doing stand-up every night. So it was like, oh, that's what he's busy with. But, you know, people always say to me that I don't seem stereotypically gay, whatever that might mean. And I think because of that, it sort of added to the illusion that couldn't be the truth. My mom came around pretty quickly. It took my dad a little bit longer, but, you know, now everybody's good. David's Jewish also. We got married, you know, under a chuppah. And, you know, Jews are pretty good about just wanting people to be happy.
Yes.
And I think that has been a theme throughout my family, that, you know, we've just tried to, you take whatever life kind of gives you and you work with that.
Do you remember what it was that motivated you when you were 25? In other words, you lived this life, you never formally said anything to your parents, and then you decided you wanted to. Why did you want to?
I think what happened ultimately was not being honest with people. You're never fully there. And by there, I mean, you're never fully present. You're with people, you're lying, sometimes intentionally, but sometimes by omission. That was the one that bothered. I realized that I became a very good liar, not because I wanted to be a liar, but suddenly I would be put in positions. People would ask me questions about where I was or what I was doing or who I was with, and I could just lie without even thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as a guy that was on tour with Jordan Peterson, one of the things he talks about is that when you put truth into the world, you have no idea how that truth could reverberate to help add order to the world. But when you put a lie into the world, you have no idea how that lie could then, expand into chaos in the world. And in retrospect, I now see that I probably by putting myself through the chaos, I probably put a lot of chaos into my relationships and my family and things like that. And by being who I am and fighting those demons, this is a phrase Jordan calls slaying your dragon, that we've all got a dragon to slay in life. And if you do it, you can move forward in life. I think by doing that, I've been able to live a fuller life. Not a perfect life. I'm doing the best I can, but a fuller life.
Okay. You also talk about how you're very good friends with Ben Shapiro. I don't know how many people who watch JBS know who Ben Shapiro is. He is a right-leaning talk show host. He has a podcast every day, and he's on radio every day. And he is an Orthodox Jew. He wears a yarmulke everywhere he goes, including if he's on television. And he leans right. And you talk about how you're friends with him, and he brings an Orthodox Jewish approach to life. Leave politics out again. And it's fascinating for the way you talk about your friendship with him. And again, I'm asking you if there's anything you can say that you feel you've learned from Ben in general, nothing to do with where you are in the political spectrum, but here you are, a non-Orthodox Jew growing up on Long Island, you're gay, and now here you are, very good friends with somebody who you say you've learned from. Talk to me about that for a moment.
Well, it's hard to totally decouple the politics from that, because so much of our relationship, at least the public side, is the political part. But you know what it's very obvious to me is that Ben, and for your audience that doesn't know him, Ben is what I would call a mainstream conservative. He probably believes 90% of the stuff that was thought of as mainstream Reagan conservatism, 25 years ago. Obviously I come from a different perspective personally and politically, but I think what we've both learned from each other, or at least had the thought hardened around each other, is that I have no desire to force Ben to accept my marriage or think anything else that his religious teachings don't teach him. And I think Ben has really come to realize that he has no right as an American to use his religious beliefs over me as an individual. So I know I'm slightly bringing politics into it.
It's all right.
But I think what that does is it allows you to see people as humans, in that what right would I have to tell Ben, you cannot have a religious belief that you have? That would be a crazy notion for me. And I think Ben, and this is where I think conservatives have done a nice job of moderating in what I would say is a good sense. Ben now really takes more of a libertarian approach on marriage, which is that he just really doesn't think the government should be involved. And in many ways, I think this is where most conservatives are. The ship has sailed already. There are very, very few conservatives that rail against gay marriage. Now, they have their own personal beliefs, and that's just fine. But that being said, I also spoke at Liberty University. It's the largest evangelical Christian college in the United States. You know, it was founded by Jerry Falwell, and now his son runs the school. I spoke in front of 14,000 students. I mean, it felt like a true political rally. And they know I have different thoughts. I come from a different place and all those things. But I gave an enjoyable talk. I got a standing ovation. I spent the day wandering around campus and having, you know, young people come up to me and take pictures. And I thought, well, this is what America is about. This is what America is about, that we can do this, but we have to actually stay true to our beliefs. You're allowed to believe what you believe, and I'm allowed to believe what I believe. We just can't force each other to do that. And I think, by the way, that's why Ben and my friendship is so upsetting to so many people on the left, because they see it and they go, this doesn't make sense. What they'll say is, oh, Shapiro's a homophobe and Dave's a self-hating gay. That's what they'll say, the supposedly tolerant people. And the reality of it is, we're two people who don't have to agree on everything. And I'll add one other person in there who I'm sure you and your audience is familiar with. We had Dennis Prager and his wife over for Shabbat dinner about 2 months ago. No, it's more than 2 months ago. It's maybe about 6 months ago now. And Dennis Prager actually does Yom Kippur services at a church here in Los Angeles, and about 500 people come. And he gives a wonderful service because he's a performer at some level, so he's doing a little bit of shtick and a little bit of comedy, and it's light and it's fun. And they bring some people from the LA Philharmonic. It's really wonderful. And I went to the service, and he didn't know I was there. But when he gave his sermon, it had something to do with gay marriage. And he talked about going to my house for Shabbat dinner, and that he may have a religious belief that's slightly different than that, but that he can accept people as people. He didn't even know I was there at the time. And there were a few people that were looking at me because people knew he was talking about me. But I think maybe Jews have done this a little bit better because we've always been the outsider. And we've seen what it's been like to be the outside, which is why, if you look back on the pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King and he's arm in arm with people, so many of the people there were Jews, because Jews know what it's like to be on the outside. So we've consistently fought for other people to be equal. I think what has sort of screwed up secular Jews now is that the progressive movement came in and it went from being equal to being sort of better than. And I think this has really caused a real schism in sort of the secular Jewish system.
Okay. So lo and behold, you tell us that your book, Don't Burn This Book, was originally going to be entitled Why I Left the Left. And that you decided after you got your advance from your publisher that you would rather write a book about how to leave the left. So I want you to describe, because here you are, a typical classic Jewish kid growing up in a Democratic home. Your parents are Democrats. You were a liberal growing up as a kid. It's not clear, and you've already said you're not where Ben Shapiro is. But I want to know, as you look at yourself, forget what other people say about you. I want to know how you feel about your own soul. If you had to define yourself on the political spectrum, do you lean far to the right? Do you lean somewhat to the right? Do you lean somewhat to the left? Do you lean center? How do you define yourself, Dave?
Well, now we're in the spot where I can talk completely confidently and not even have to think when I'm talking, because this is my lane. So what I lay out in the book are my classically liberal principles. And I believe that the ideas of classical liberalism, which I sort of touched on earlier, the belief in individual rights. So if you're a legal member of this society, you are treated exactly the same by the law as anybody else. That's number one. And then the light touch of government, meaning that we want things to be done by the market. We want private enterprise and competition to do as much as possible. But we also understand that we need some guardrails on society to keep the whole thing going. And then what we can do is debate, when do we need government to do certain things? By the way, we're having an actually somewhat healthy debate about this right now related to coronavirus, which is, we've seen a lot of private companies turn their factories into places where they're making masks and things, which is wonderful. And then we've also handed some of the power to the states, which is great, but also what does the federal government have to do? These are very healthy debates that we should be having in America more often, which, by the way, I finished writing this book in July. Obviously, I didn't know about coronavirus, but these are some of the ideas that I lay forth, which is, it's nice to see that they're very relevant now.
Yes.
So I would say, as a classical liberal, what I just described to you right there, if the average person heard, okay, individual rights, light touch of government, that sounds like a libertarian, meaning I just don't want the government to do that much. You can live your life, I'll live mine, and then little bits. So I don't mind being called a libertarian. We could whittle away the little bit of differences. Generally, a classical liberal believes in a little more government than a libertarian, but that's almost irrelevant. I go to libertarian conferences and we get into those policy discussions where you can whittle it down to whether we should have driver's licenses. So we can sort of put that aside. I would say I have nothing to do with the modern left. So when we talk about progressives and the sort of Bernie Sanders socialist, big government progressives, I view that as a time-tested set of ideas that have failed every time over and over, that have caused chaos and destruction and death. Every rise of every authoritarian regime always comes with a smile on their face that we're doing good for everybody, right? And ultimately what they're doing is sucking power to the government and trying to rearrange society. So I don't sense that there's any true liberalism left in what the modern left has become. I would say, if anything, if I really had to answer your question specifically, I certainly lie on the right now, so some sort of center-right category. And if I had to come up with a new name for it, if I can't save the word liberalism from itself, which maybe that ship has sailed, right? I mean, JFK was what I would call a good liberal. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's the reverse of what today's liberals will tell you. Bernie Sanders could never say that. He says the reverse. We can do this for you. So I would say I have really nothing to do with modern leftism. I would say a new phrase, if I had to pick a new phrase, is sort of a modern conservative. I believe in mostly the ideals that conservatives believe, but I hold some positions that are not purely conservative positions. But if they're willing to carve out a little space for that, which I sense they are, then I'm completely fine with a modern conservative.
Okay, I want to push you again. First of all, I want to read a section of your book. We'll put it up on the screen at the same time. You write, I want to champion the values that keep people safe, sane, and free. Once upon a time, the left truly was liberal. Liberals used to champion the rights of women, black people, and gays. They fought for all marginalized groups to be equal under the law. This was authentic liberalism based on individual rights, and it was damn good. My sense is all the things that are associated with liberal social values, Dave Rubin espouses to this day. Am I wrong?
No, well, look, if we were to say that liberalism meant the fighting for equality under the law, then yes, that liberalism is my liberalism. Unfortunately, what has happened is it's morphed into something else through progressivism, where it's, we want to help these people, which sort of sounds right, but then of course you always have to punish people. So a great example of this, and I think there's a parable here to what Jews are dealing with, is that Harvard University has decided that they don't want a certain amount of Asians to be at their school, that they had too much Asian representation at the school. So this is public knowledge, that they now depress the number of Asian students. They make it harder for Asian students to come in than other students. Now, the idea is a progressive idea. The idea is, well, we want to help these other students, so we're going to get them in. But of course, by helping one group, you have to punish another group. Now, it is not a liberal principle of equality to punish a person based on the color of their skin. Now, you could think of every Asian person from every Asian culture that you can think of, whether they're Korean or Chinese or Japanese or whatever it might be. They all came here the same way your grandparents and my grandparents and everyone else's came here, with nothing. And then they worked really hard. And what do Asians broadly hold to be important: education, family, hard work, all of those things that are very important. So now they do that, and then they've become more successful, more accepted, more, at a very high socioeconomic state and the rest of it. And then what does the system, what do the progressives say? We're now going to punish you for it. You've worked too hard, you've succeeded too much. And it is not a liberal principle to say to a 17-year-old kid whose parents maybe escaped communist China or something, came here, busted their butts, worked really hard, and then we're going to say to that kid, you did everything right, everything that America teaches you to do, but we've got to punish you because we have to let somebody else in. I actually think that's deeply anti-American and deeply anti-liberal.
People who disagree with you wouldn't say it that way.
This I know.
They wouldn't say they're punishing Asians. And by the way, one of the things that bothers me, this is like a footnote. I'd be curious to hear whether it bothers you as well. Whether one watches MSNBC or Fox, no matter what, ABC, doesn't matter. You never hear two intelligent people with differing ideas
never
go back and forth. There's never debate or even forget debate, discussion on television. And as a result, it's almost like people now look for the channel and the ideology that they already agree with. And one of the things that was true for me growing up as a classic Jewish liberal kid was that you always wanted to listen to the other side. In the Jewish tradition, there's this great notion of elu ve'elu, that both sides have some sense of divine truth. And you listen and you learn. Doesn't mean you have to agree. It's sort of the way you describe your relationship with Ben Shapiro. That was the way that was the way I grew up and all the people around me grew up. Now, there is very little discussion. More than that, and you heard me reference this in the open, it's almost as if you're the other side, although as much as we're told that liberals want to respect the other, they make the non-liberal an other whom they don't respect at all. There's something very ironic about that. But what we see now is, in the liberal world, Democrats are good, Republicans are bad. Progressives are humane, conservatives are merciless. Socialists are generous, capitalists are greedy. And that it's white and black in that gross statements. But the people who would see the Harvard situation differently would say to you, there is an underclass that you, Dave Rubin, must be sensitive to. And the only way that underclass, which is mostly of color, not yellow, not Asian, some form of black and brown, they're either African Americans who were brought here as slaves, or they are Latinos who've come here from poverty looking for a better life. The only way to help them up is to make room for them. I remember the whole idea of, the quota system and affirmative action when I'm about ready to go to college. And then when my kids are going to college, it is still, affirmative action is a big deal. Do you tell the white man he must make room, because otherwise the underclass, which needs to be lifted up, can't be. It's not that we're telling the Asian, you followed the rules, but we're going to disregard you. It's that we want to go out of our way to help those who need help. What's your answer to that perspective?
Yeah, respectfully, I completely disagree with the premise. No one gave, whether it's your grandparents that came here or whatever it might be, how far back, no one gave them anything. There is no promise in America of being given anything. Hard work and dedication and family with equal rights that is the American gambit, and that is the only thing that will make you successful. So they might say, well, we're not doing this to punish the Asian student, but it is in effect what you are doing. Nobody's stopping a young Latino or a young Black man or anyone from doing anything in America. I am concerned that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And if we start giving special rights to people based on group identity, that is so deeply dangerous. And this is an odd thing that I think really has confused a lot of secular Jews, especially because we are so consistently thought of as the other. Jews always fought for equality, not for special treatment. Jews fought to get into country clubs so they could be treated equally, not so they could be treated better. Jews tried to get into Harvard and Cornell so they could be treated equally, not any better. They didn't say, oh, we need to get into Harvard and with lesser grades or something like that. They just said, treat us like everyone else. That is the pluralist society that I want to live in. I would also, I mean, depending how deep we wanted to get into this, I would also expand and say to these people that the more that you give handouts to certain groups, these things simply don't work, because if they did work, then we would see people getting out of the cycle of poverty. But the same people who always tell us we have to give more money also tell us that nobody gets out of poverty. But we know for a fact, I've interviewed Thomas Sowell and some brilliant economists on this, that once you start giving a group certain things, you start, and giving them housing, giving them extra benefits, all these things, it's not their fault actually, but they get caught in a cycle of poverty that then gets generationally crushed, because you know that if you can live in an apartment in Manhattan for $400 because of your socioeconomic level or the color of your skin or some combination thereof, why would you ever get out of that when the market price for that apartment is probably $3,000 and you'd have to work way harder and everything else? And then you give that apartment to your grandchild. I know very personal examples of this that I could tell you about. So what I would say there is that the intention of the argument that you're laying out there is the right intent. It's the right instinct. We want people to be helped. We do. But I believe that the best way to help people is say, listen, you've been given a chance. Now get out there and do it. If you were to tell me that there was a job that was discriminating against Latino people, that there was a school that was discriminating against Black people, things like that, well, now we can work through to how to end that discrimination. But inserting discriminations, in this case against Asian people, so that you can help another ethnic group, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, by the way, just for the record, I'm not expressing where
I sensed it. That's
right.
Quite all right. And even if you were, I'd still like you.
Okay. And it's very important for me, I believe, to ask you the questions which somebody who disagrees with you would ask you.
By the way, on YouTube, we call that steel manning. What you tried to do there, quite well actually, is you tried to steel man the opposition's idea. And that is an important thing to do, because you don't really know what you think until you've actually countered the other thought. So it's an important piece.
The ideal for me would be to have Dave Rubin on, even Zoom, with somebody who thinks you're out of your mind, and you discuss it. And it's interesting. I'll say it again. I grow up a liberal, and now because of my stand on Israel, which is in favor of a two-state solution. However, I see no one on the Palestinian side to have a two-state solution with. And I am among those who say, if you can't have a two-state solution, you still don't tie Israel down to a piece of land as if they have no right to live anywhere in what was the Palestinian mandate and once was Eretz Yisrael. But because I take that stand, all of a sudden I'm not so liberal. There's not an issue that I can think of where people are more liberal. That's different than saying progressive. I don't associate myself with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And sort of, as you've said, I'm worried that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party now is exercising much too much power. But if somebody says to me, are you a liberal? My answer is absolutely. And if they say to me, and do you think Israel's the bad guy? I say, absolutely not. And then people will say to me, well, because than you are, and then they'll pigeonhole me. And I was sort of getting at that with you. I feel there are many positions you take which are still classically liberal, and then you have evolved in certain other ways, which makes you, in my mind, more a centrist. I wish the center saw the political reality of life as you did, and I wish the center, even in the Jewish community, was willing to dialogue with somebody like you without vilifying somebody like you. At the moment, because you take certain political views, you're vilified. And I find that in the Jewish world un-Jewish and reprehensible. So I do have more to ask you, but I do want to hear you respond to just what I've said now.
Yeah, well, I think what we're going to start finding in America is something like what has sort of happened in Israel, where there is no real sort of sane left in Israel anymore, and that the country, even though they're having, election after election, the basis of whether it's Likud or one of the new parties, blue and white or whatever it might be, that the center of the country has moved to something center-right. The leftist, Meretz and some of the really leftist parties, they have nothing anymore. The old Labor Party is completely gone now. And I sense that's what will happen to America, is that there will be a sort of alliance of the old school liberals, as you describe yourself, and as I describe myself, the sort of new conservatives who are a little more open-minded, maybe on some of the social issues, or at least are willing to agree to disagree, the libertarians who just want to stay out of everyone's lives. That strikes me as a very, very rich place to create a very wide tent of political people. That would be what I would call a very healthy center-right. That is what I think has sort of happened to Israel. They've moved there. Now they're having their own problems because of their parliamentary system, but so let's put that aside. But I sense we're going to sort of shift there. And in a weird way, it'll be almost every one of us sort of versus the real sort of radical leftists that have kind of taken over the Democratic Party. And then the important thing is that people on the right will have to make sure that no really radical elements on the right sort of infiltrate that. So I do see that as a rich future. And I would also say maybe I might lend this line to you because I think you'll like it. But I always say to people that defending my liberal principles is becoming a conservative position. And I've even gotten Shapiro to say that one every now and again. So there you go.
All right. So now I'm going to push you a little bit more, because one of the big issues for people who believe that they're seeing reality better than others. And there are these are good people. These are people with good hearts. They want the best for the other as well as for their own families. I'm talking about very well-meaning, lovely, lovely Jewish people who are part of my own congregation, who I adore them. And yet they look at someone who doesn't vilify Donald Trump and say, if you don't understand how Trump is evil incarnate, you haven't opened your eyes and there's something wrong with you. I want to know from you, where do you stand on Donald Trump? Where do you stand on Charlottesville? Where do you stand on the far in terms of what is called white supremacists? What's your sense of all this?
Yeah, well, let's do the easy part first. I mean, in terms of white supremacists or what would be termed as the alt-right, or any sort of collectivism based around creating America as some sort of white ethno-national state or something like that, it is completely counter to every belief I hold. It's completely counter to the founding documents of the United States. So we can just remove that very quickly. The Trump conversation obviously is more difficult. And what I would say about Trump is that I think Trump is basically, I think he's probably mostly a right-leaning centrist, but more than anything else, I think he's a pragmatist as a businessman. And I think his greatest gift is also the reason that you hear that from people in your congregation, the negative things about him. What Trump saw, and I think a lot of people see this now, is that when we normally have an election, you think about it as the Democrat versus the Republican, as if it's some sort of equal fight. And the Republicans, they tried it with good men. John McCain, regardless of what you might think about some of his political stuff, was obviously a good, decent human being. Mitt Romney, this is a good, decent human being. They both lost. But the reason they lost is because it's the Republican versus the Democrat and the media. The media establishment obviously leans left and leans towards the Democrats. I mean, the very simple example I can give you is that Brett Kavanaugh had sexual assault allegations against him. All they were allegations. The media ran with it for months on the cover of everything. Right now, as we speak, Joe Biden has sexual assault allegations. Again, all they are allegations, but the media buried it for weeks until it grew up so much on YouTube and Twitter that they couldn't handle it anymore. Now, the reason for that, they don't like Republicans, they like Democrats. Trump, I think, saw that and said, you know what? I'm not going to play by these rules. I am not going to play this game where we're going to be in a boxing match and I'm going to have one hand tied behind my back. And Trump said, I'm just going to do it. So when I say his strength is his weakness, his strength is that he has attacked everybody equally. And then his weakness then is that because he has done it and won, people want him to behave differently. They want him to behave more statesmanlike, or they don't want him to tweet as much or whatever else. Now, I'm with that. I'm with the general idea. Would I rather have Thomas Jefferson and a seriously well-spoken, well-thought-out, a guy who I think really would understand all of the principles that I believe in as president? I would, but we only get what we get. And I think Trump ultimately has been a net good for America. We had to break the political class and the media class. They have been lying to us. They have been dishonest with us. And he went in and did it. It doesn't make him a great person. It doesn't make him a deeply moral person or an honest person. But by the way, politics is not a place for deeply moral, honest people. It's a messy game. And I would say if we just look at the policies of Trump, I've basically been fine with those policies. The personality stuff, I get it. I get why that person at your congregation feels it. I have family members that feel that sort of thing. And I've tried to just say to people, at least right now, we don't know what the other side is because we have no idea what's going to happen with Biden. And it's unfortunate that if you vote for Biden, in effect, you're voting for his vice president. It's just become obvious that there's some cognitive stuff there that's very sad. My grandma had dementia. I'm not saying this to be glib or humorous in any way, but something's not right there. And the media is hiding it from us. And yet the day that the story finally breaks, everyone's going to say, oh, I knew too. They kept me quiet. And that's sort of the depressing reality of the marriage between the media and the Democrats. And I think Trump just sees that.
And what about Charlottesville? But, it's interesting. Much of the criticism I hear of Trump had to do with things he did or said while he was running for president. And yes, I think that, I hear this all the time from left and right, by the way. It's amazing how many people on the right, including like yourself or like a Ben Shapiro, that are very honest about Trump's weaknesses. They just don't despise the man for his weaknesses, and they distinguish between a guy who really was never schooled to be president and the policies which have come out under his administration. But what people say all the time is, as a human being, he is vile. What we've heard him say, what people have said about him. And then he was asked, what do you think about David Duke? And he didn't say right away what you say about white supremacists. And then everybody quotes Charlottesville, where he supposedly said there are good people on both sides. And for you personally, how do you answer those who say to you, how can you support a man who said there are good people on both sides of Charlottesville?
Okay, so I'm really glad you asked this, and I think it's incredibly important that everyone listening to this needs to go on YouTube after this and find the full remarks that he said. He did not say there are good people on both sides, meaning there are good white supremacists on one side and anti-racists on the other. The statement he said right before that was something to the effect of, I absolutely condemn the white supremacists and the Nazis, whatever the exact words he said, that's what he said. And then the next statement was, there are good people on both sides. But what he meant was there are good people on both sides of the statue debate, whether you should take down a statue or not. I happen to be on the side that means leave them up. So I don't know if that makes me evil. I don't want to erase history. If you want to put a plaque next to it that says, well, Robert E. Lee did this, that, the other thing, well, that's okay. But I don't want to take statues down. So it's vitally important, if anyone that's watching this is still confused as to whether Trump said, oh, there's white supremacists that are good on this side, and then, you know, there's other people on this side. That is not what he said. But the danger of that is the media runs cover for the people that say it. So Joe Biden, when he announced his campaign, he included that line in the campaign announcement, in the commercial that went out. And he knew he could do it because the media will run cover for him. So I'm glad you asked me, and I hope it'll clear it up for a couple people.
So, Dave, what do you think of Fox News?
Listen, Fox lets me go on and say whatever I want. I have big disagreements with Tucker. Tucker Carlson and I disagree on big tech, whether government should be involved. That's something that I hold. It's one of my pet issues that I really am obsessed with, actually, because of the way I make my living. I go on there. I go on Greg Gutfeld, and he's more of a comic, so we have fun time there. I find Dana Perino to be lovely and interesting and enlightened. They never tell me what I can't say. I don't even have to give them talking points. I just go on and I do it live. Doesn't mean I agree with everything that's said on there. Of course not. But I would say, basically what I would say is Fox is a necessary counterbalance to pretty much everything else that is left. The obsession with Fox is because they're the only one mainstream that offers anything that would be thought of as right or conservative. It's not that they're so evil. It's just that they're the one outlier. Everything else is lefty. So Fox is a counterbalance to that, and they take the hits for it.
On the back of your book, in terms of the people who are writing testimonials to how good your book is, Tucker Carlson's among them. And he talks about how bright you are. What do you think of Tucker?
I like Tucker. I think he's a pretty clean thinker. I think he has staked out difficult positions. I think he hits both sides. During the coronavirus alone, I mean, look what he's done over the last 2 months. I don't know how many people have not only hit the governors, but then also hit Trump when he felt that Trump did something, either missed a decision or made a bad decision or anything else. I find Tucker to be one of the pretty consistent political people that we have. It's not an easy job to be in cable news. You're going to be attacked by everybody. I find him to be pretty honest. And more than anything else, I mean, I can tell you, I've interviewed him in my own studio. The second he sat down, Dave, nothing's off limits, whatever you want to talk about. We don't edit on my show. So it was all live to tape, and we put it all up, and he had no problem with any of it.
I find that the only place on American television today where people who the host disagrees with are given a platform is Fox. I virtually never see it on any other platform. By the way, PBS does some of it, and the Brooks-Shields debate, in some way it is what you wish you would see everywhere on television, but you don't see it on CNN.
I can tell you this. Look, I'm on a book tour right now. I've gone on every single Fox show, and I have not been invited on one CNN show nor one MSNBC show. What does that tell you? Yeah. That tells you it right there.
Yes. And by the way, while people talk about news, there are people on Fox who are obviously ideologues. I don't think Tucker, by the way, he has his own philosophy, but he's not a Hannity. And you can like Hannity or not like Hannity, but Hannity tells you what he is. He is someone whose job is to give opinion. But there are also people who do straight news on Fox. And I think Bret Baier is one of the best journalists on American television anywhere. He happens to be on Fox.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they have a nice blend there. I have no problem inherently with what they're doing. I think the obsession with Fox is unhealthy, because if Fox was taken out, we'd have no opposition in terms of mainstream, and I think that would be a problem.
Okay. And Dave, what do you think of Alan Dershowitz?
Well, we've got a couple good liberals left, and I think he's one of them. And I think the way he's treated by his former colleagues, former professors, former students. By all accounts, he's helped so many people further their careers and their intellectual pursuits. He is, no one doubts his credentials, his legal credentials. And because he has taken some positions that are now more right, let's say, or defended Trump using his constitutional knowledge, as he says, he doesn't get invited to the parties by the tolerant liberals anymore. I know a little something about that. So I do need to sit down with him because I think we would find common cause there.
Yeah. By the way, all he does is tell the truth as he sees it. It's not that he's become someone on the right. He just believes that you treat left and right with the same principles. One of the things that we've seen, Dave, is that people who preached principles, when the shoe was on the other foot, all of a sudden those principles don't apply. And it hurts me as someone who grew up believing that the essence of liberalism was a commitment to the rule of law, even if the law ultimately punished you. And right now we're living in a world where people who hate Trump say anybody who doesn't hate Trump doesn't respect the rule of law. While what I watch going on in society right now is a flagrant disregard for the rule of law among people who are lovely and who grew up just as I grew up, and maybe as you grew up, as passionate liberals. Do you see any of this yourself?
Of course. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that the traditional liberal is almost gone. Sure, we could, just if you think of the public sphere, where are the good liberals? So, okay, we can talk about Dershowitz, we can talk about Bill Maher, but there really aren't good liberals. Where are the good liberals in the Democratic Party who were supposed to get up there and say, whoa, we now see the winds of socialism appearing on our team. Let's take them and let's counter those ideas. Well, not only did no one do it, but now Biden has in many ways incorporated many of those ideas into his campaign. And we know right now that the Bernie crew is trying to extract concessions from Biden to fully get Bernie's support. I don't think it's going to work as a product, as an experiment that these two can really get their ideas together because they're so counter. But yeah, there are no mature liberals left in many ways. I suppose in a lot of ways, that's why people care about what I do, because I've tried to wave that flag.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody, a Jew, who said that their number one issue when they go to the polls in a presidential election is how that person's administration would relate to the state of Israel, that Israel is their number one issue when voting in American election? What would you say to that?
Well, I would hate to, I'll get to Israel specifically, but I would hate to say that to anyone that your number one issue should have to be a foreign policy issue related to another country. That, first off, I think would be a very dangerous place. There are so many more things that affect you in your daily life that politicians and politics has a hand in, that I think something would have gone really sort of out of whack if that really would be the first thing that you would vote for. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't care about Israel. I deeply care about Israel. I think Jews deserve the same right of self-determination that every other people deserve. Jews have carved out a place until the last couple of years where there's some natural gas, had no resources, and they took the desert and made it bloom. It's the size of New Jersey in a pretty rough neighborhood, and it's become a hub of technology and freedom and rights and a true place of diversity. And if you wanted to know where the Arab people have the most voting rights in all of the Middle East, it is in Israel. That doesn't make it perfect. There's things that need to be dealt with, but no country's perfect. But I think the left's endless obsession with Israel, the idea that of all countries on earth, that's the tiny little place that should be boycotted and sanctioned and the rest of it. Well, that's anti-Semitism. Like, that's it. It ain't that hard. I don't know why we're afraid to say it. I don't run around calling people bigots and all those things. But if you look at the entire world, all of the things going on in the world, and your obsession is the endless desire to attack the one little place that the Jews returned to where they came from all those years before, while at the same time you're always talking about indigenous rights and the rest of it, you might be a little bit of an anti-Semite. That just is. And the irony, of course, is that if Israel was ever to lose one war, which we know it can never lose one war because that's the last war, but if the Jews were then suddenly slaughtered and oppressed again, the left would love the Jews again because the left loves victims. That is why the left has such a problem with Israel. Jews are supposed to be victims. They need victims in their scorecard for their whole worldview to make sense. So they don't like American Jews because American Jews have succeeded and folded into the fabric of America, but they really hate Israel because those are the Jews that not only thrived, but they've also got guns and they can really defend themselves. So that's a real anathema to them. So that's why there's so many weird things related to Israel. But at the end of the day, if you're running around and the one place you hate the most is Israel, you're saying more about yourself than you're saying about Israel.
Good for you. All right, so as we begin to wrap up, what would you say to my age group of bright, lovely American Jews raised as liberals, Jews passionate about ending racism, ending poverty, ending inequality, especially in the economic realm, truly good people with good hearts and good values, and they care, who see so much of American society and Republican politics, and especially Donald Trump, as evil, and so destructive to the social fabric and well-being of our country, or even the world, so much so that they see red when people see things differently. And you know, Dave, friendships have ended.
Yeah.
There are families that don't speak to each other at family gatherings. And there's no serious discussion. What would you say to those Jews?
I would say you might have to reevaluate some of your premises. That we've done most of the things that I think decent Americans and decent Jews have wanted to do. Everyone's equal in the United States. It doesn't mean we all have the same stuff. It doesn't mean we all don't have different struggles, but the point of what your grandparents fought for in America was for equality, and we did it. We did it well, and we should cherish it. But it doesn't mean because your parents were Democrats that you have to be Democrat. And by the way, it doesn't mean that because your parents were Republican that you have to be Republican. But I think this notion that I think when you talk about, people of your generation, I think there's this idea that somehow the Democrats are still the Democrats of 1950. And they're not. They are very, very, very different. And you might also have to reevaluate some of your actual positions, meaning you might think that at one time you might have thought, well, Jews usually vote Democrat, which means that they're usually voting against their own economic interests. That's a really bizarre thing, right? Most people vote for their own economic interests. Jews usually have done pretty well and then vote for higher taxes, meaning take more of my money. Well, you know what? How about start voting for lower taxes, and then if you want to do good with your money, go ahead and do it, right? Tikkun olam, get to it. You can put some money in the mitzvah box, whatever you want to do. Make it more about what you put into the world rather than that the government has to do everything. I think actually in many ways a slim, trim, more libertarian style government is actually a great safeguard for Jews and for other minorities, because a government without that much power can't do that much bad. And usually when governments do bad, the Jews are involved in the people that they're doing bad to.
The one thing we didn't talk about, and as you answered it then, it occurred to me, we didn't talk about free speech in America and the extent to which there have been censorship. I'm not sure whether I read that something you ever did was taken down by YouTube, but I know you mentioned Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager had something taken down from YouTube. And right now there's this attitude that social media giants like YouTube, Google, Twitter, they have the right to decide what is hate speech or what not is hate speech. And if it's hate speech, or if it's speech that in some way now is defined as hurting the social good, they have the right to take it down. I want to hear you speak for one moment about how you feel in general about the principle of free speech as it is being either exercised or limited in America. And where do you stand on, is there any line that you wouldn't cross that would move into hate speech that violates in your mind the First Amendment?
Yeah, well, it's probably the right place to end all of this because it really incorporates everything else we've talked about. So first off, we have to make an important distinction between, of course, our First Amendment rights, which stop the government from infringing on your free speech, versus what a private company is allowed to do, in this case, Twitter, YouTube, Google, and Facebook. So I am still not for the government forcing those companies to do anything. Now, the reason that that's a little bit of a murky line is that it's very hard to tell what the connection points between the government and big tech is, right? We just don't really know. And I think that's a problem. And the other problem, of course, is that, you know, at some point, the Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, especially now in a time of coronavirus where this is all we have to communicate, they have so much power over our lives that I think there's an understandable argument, usually from conservatives, that you have to regulate them. I just don't like the idea that I just don't find the government to be a particularly functioning entity that could suddenly regulate big tech. They're not very good at it. Have you ever paid your taxes on a government website? I mean, it looks like it's from 1984. So the idea that they could even do it, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. That being said, I'm a free speech absolutist. We have set up the best protections around speech in the world. In America, you can say whatever you want. You can't incite violence to a group or a specific person, meaning say, hey, all of you, get him. You can't do that. We have extremely strict protections around libel and slander, which I'm completely fine with because people have to be able to protect their reputations. And then the only other thing is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, which, by the way, is a little bit of there's confusion around that. You actually can yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't do it with the intent to cause unrest.
Yes.
Beyond that, you can say whatever you want. I don't believe in hate speech. I don't believe, this is the Supreme Court's position on this. You're allowed to say you don't like a certain set of people. You're allowed to say mean things. That's an upsetting fact of life, but there's no way around it. Would you rather the government come in and decide what's hateful and when it's hateful? There's no way to do it. So we want to be as liberal as possible when it comes to free speech.
And if somebody talked about hating Jews,
you're allowed to say it. You're allowed to say it. You can say it. It's odious, and we have to counter it. But what they can't say is, let's go kill those Jews. That's incitement. That's different.
The argument is that if you talk about hating another group, that ultimately there is implicit there incitement. That's the
argument
being used.
I understand the argument. And at that point, I would say, well, that's why you have law enforcement to make sure those incidences don't happen. There's no perfect protection around people's words and ideas that are going to stop bad people from doing bad things. And by the way, if you passed a law that said, all right, you can't say you hate Jews. Well, guess what? There's all sorts of corners of the internet where people are going to do it, and then they're going to feel persecuted, and then they'll feel that there is a conspiracy and the rest of it. So you have to be as open as possible with language.
All right. Very last question. Dave Rubin, if you wrote your book today, Don't Burn This Book, would you write it any differently? Are there things that you said in the book now you would take out? Are there any things in the book you wish you could add?
I don't think so. I gave the book everything I've got. The one thing that we took out a little bit more than I would have liked, there's some funny moments in there, obviously. I did take out a little more of the humor than I wanted to because I was trying to blend just the right amount of humor with the right amount of politics and the right amount of personal stuff. Maybe I would have stuck a couple more zingers in there. But the ideas are the ideas that I believe in. I think it's important. I'm thrilled that, 7 months after finishing the book, that it's more relevant now than it was even when I finished it. And I think that's when you write something about time-tested ideals, they're not only good for a month, they're good for generations. And that's what I hope I've done with this book.
you are an interviewer. So you've been, in this instance, you've allowed me to talk to you. By the way, I don't call this an interview, I call it a conversation. But you very often are the leader of the conversation, and here you're letting me lead. And when you invite somebody that you don't know already, and they come into your studio and you sit with them, or now you do it on Zoom, whatever, you never know whether this person in person is going to be lovely and thoughtful, or whether it's all a fraud or whatever. And I want you to know, I read your book. I've seen you on television. Many things you've done have impressed me. I wanted to meet you. You were kind enough to say you'd come on L'chaim, and you are a gem. I could not have imagined somebody as lovely as you, even though I thought you were going to be lovely. So it has been wonderful meeting you in this ridiculous manner. It is my
fakakta. Come on, fakakta.
Yeah, okay. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, all success with your book and your career, and with David and everything you try to do in your family life. And I really hope that one day when this nonsense is all over, as busy as you are, somehow you and I will get to meet in person. Maybe I'll have a chance to do this in studio or in your studio. But you're an important voice, and you're a lovely voice. It's been an honor to meet you and spend this time with you on L'chaim.
Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. From one interviewer to another, you know what you're doing, my friend, and I look forward to connecting in the future.
Thank you. You be well, Dave. The thoughts of Dave Rubin, author of Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in the Age of Unreason. It's published by Penguin Books. It's available on Amazon, also as an Audible book read by Dave himself. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me at rabbigolub@jbstv.org. And you can write me at Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut, 06904. And remember, L'chaim is now a podcast which you can download and listen to anywhere. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.